I spent 32 years at the Central Intelligence Agency. I know it doesn't look like I did, or, how could that be? And that was from 1978 to 2010. And my career paralleled the period from the typewriter to Twitter. And I spent about half of that career at the CIA as a heretic. A heretic is an interesting word, someone whose views are differ from the prevailing orthodoxy. So what I want to do this afternoon is share with you some stories and some lessons that I learned on surviving as a change agent in a very large and maybe scary organization. And I think if you're a software developer and your company's product outcome is not software, but something else, so that you're a facilitator, sometimes the ideas or concepts that you have for doing things differently can put you in the position of being a change agent. So the first lesson has nothing to do with my career at CIA. In fact, I go back to my childhood. I'm Puerto Rican by birth. My dad was a sergeant in the Army, and I spent about 10 years from the 6th grade to the start of college in Texas. So I like to say that I'm Puerto Rican by birth and Texan by nationality. How many of you have been to Texas? A few. South by Southwest? Anybody? It's worth going to. And as I said, my father was a sergeant in the Army, and he was also an alcoholic. He drank too much, and my family had a lot of fights. I was living in El Paso, Texas, and it was very common for my father to pick a fight with my mother. I was often sort of the MacGuffin, the issue around which they fought. I was in high school. I was a good student. My teachers wanted me to go to college. My dad didn't understand why women needed to go to college. He thought I felt I was above him, smarter than he was. His favorite phrase for me was to call me a chicken shit lawyer. So this night in question, I also had a brother, a younger brother. So he was probably like 14 or 15. And like 14 or 15-year-old boys, he was suffering from very bad acne. So that particular night, my spider sense was activated, because having lived in this situation for such a long time, I could tell the moment my dad walked in the house whether or not he was in a mood, and we were likely to have a fight. My brother had a pair of paisley pajamas that I just coveted. I just thought they were the bomb. And then his face, of course, was covered with acne medicine. This particular night, sure enough, my parents are fighting. And I call the police, and they show up. And this was not the first time they'd been there. And of course, as soon as the police show up, that tends to tone my father down. And the policeman walks in the foyer and says, "Can someone please tell me what's going on here? What is the problem?" And my brother steps forward in all his glory. And he says, "I can, sir. I know what the problem is." And the officer says, "Well, tell me." And my brother says, "The problem, sir, is that my sister is an intellectual." So 7 years later, I'm in my first professional job. I'm interning at the State Department. And the person that I'm interning with is a historian, a PhD historian, N. Stephen Kane. The Kane stood for some other East European name that the family had shortened. And we're telling stories, and I happen to tell him this story. And he says to me, "You know, Carmen, I have a very similar family background. We are first-generation immigrants to the US. My dad was uneducated. I got a PhD. And when I went home, or when with the family, my dad thinks I'm too smart for them. And we would have arguments. And then one day I realized, it just like I had an epiphany, it occurred to me that if I'm the smart one, if I'm the one that knows so much, isn't it my responsibility to make sure we have productive conversations? And I was like, that was like, I hadn't thought about that. So when you're the change agent, and you're so smart, and you know what the right way is for the company to go, then you should be smart enough to ensure that, to be responsible for having productive conversations. Lesson 2. So now we're going to just jump forward into my agency career. And I'm at the CIA, and by the late 1980s, and my career is going very well. I'm an analyst. I try to make sense of the world. And by the late 1980s, there are 2 things that I'm observing in the external environment that are persuading me that the CIA's business model is in trouble. Of course, I didn't know the phrase business model. I don't even know if people were using that phrase 35 years ago. But I could tell that the way the world was changing was such that the CIA would have to change in a significant way. So I'm wondering if any of you could guess what I was observing in the external environment. I'll tell you, it's not the end of the Cold War, because it isn't happening yet. That too was another factor. But what I was noticing in the 1980s really had nothing to do with national security. Any guesses as to what I was observing? You can just yell it out. Sorry? Protests. There were protests, but that's not what it really has nothing to do with politics. So often that happens to organizations, that they don't pay attention to what's changing in the world in areas that they don't normally pay attention to, right? Any thoughts? Yes. Computers is shorthand for digital technologies. And the very first digital technology I saw that I thought, whoa, was the fax machine. We laugh now, yes. But we had, in the late 1980s, a secure fax machine. It was 3 times the size of a refrigerator. It's huge. But I don't know if you know, the CIA is across the river from DC. It's actually in Virginia. And we could put a secure piece of our analysis. So we were like journalists. We wrote on a daily basis what was going on in the world, but we had supposedly all this super secret squirrel information. We'd put that piece of paper in the fax machine, and it would show up 12 seconds later in Washington, D.C., in the White House Situation Room. And I thought to myself, wow, if we could deliver what we know that way, why are we writing only once a day and delivering the news in what was then called the National Intelligence Daily once a day? What's that about? What's the second thing that I noticed? Anybody? This one's harder to guess. It was the rise of the cable news network. Cable news had not always existed. I bet for half of this audience, you've had cable news all your life. CNN or whatever, Al Jazeera now. But back, CNN was created in the 1980s. And I started watching CNN, and I was going, again, the news that they're delivering overlaps like 80% with what the CIA does. And I'm being generous to the CIA when I say 80%. And they're delivering it continuously, and we're like delivering it again. Once a day, the little white vans leave the compound and deliver the National Intelligence Daily, and I'm like, this is not sustainable. Well, then it got even more intense in the mid-1990s when the internet arrives. And as by 1995, 1996, I was convinced that the internet was going to change the world. Let me tell you, I got lots of things wrong in my career, but this one, I just knew that every knowledge organization was going to have to change the way it did its business. So in the mid-1990s, and I'm like a mid-level person at the CIA by then, I tell people, the internet is for real, it's not going to go away, and we are going to have to adapt. Now, I'm embarrassed to say that I only recognized what I was doing wrong in hindsight. You can help me. What was the internet about in its infancy? What were the guiding aspirations of the internet? Tell me. Freedom of information, access to everyone, open. What's the CIA about? I mean, I only realized this in hindsight. The CIA is not about any of those things. It's about secrecy, controlling information. So what I was doing as a change agent, I was arguing for theological change. What I was suggesting was completely against the principles of the CIA. And I'm not saying don't ever do it as a change agent. But what I'm saying is you have to recognize, first you have to actually recognize that it is theological change. And I didn't for many years. And second, you have to understand that theological change is very hard. If you're like the boss, if you're Steve Jobs, you can, force theological change, or the Pope. But if you're not the Pope, it's very hard as an individual change agent to advance that. Lesson 3. So, 3 or 4 years later, I'm in a meeting with business people. We were in New York City, probably in the shadows of the World Trade Center, like 1999, and we're having an exchange of ideas. We wanted to understand more, what's going to happen? What's next for the internet, right? And we were chatting, and afterwards, we were having drinks. And this woman comes up to me. I still have her business card. She's from DuPont. She comes straight up to me, and she goes, "Carmen, I can tell that you're a heretic at CIA." And I was like, that's the first time anyone had described me that word, that term I'd ever associated it with myself. I just thought I was a brilliant person. I didn't realize I was a heretic. And she goes, "And I'm here to tell you something, that when you're a heretic in an organization, it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And it's not enough for you to understand that it's going to feel really uncomfortable. You have to learn to be happy with that feeling of discomfort. You have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And when you are comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's like a sign to you that you are actually trying to work toward your goals, that you are trying to advance your ideas." I still think of her like a guardian angel who just kind of showed up in my life just to tell me that one thing. So lesson 4. So many years later, I am, I've been arguing this thing about the internet, and I don't think anyone's listening to my brilliance. And so my career just kind of collapses. I was in an organization, and I got the reputation of, people said, "You're cynical and negative." And I even remember I had a fight with friends of mine, longtime friends, who said, "Carmen, we don't think you're going to shut up until we admit you're right." And I thought to myself, yeah, that's it, right? And but it was a very difficult period, very depressing. And so I sort of almost had given up on the idea until this new job was announced in the CIA. And remember how I told you that the National Intelligence Daily was driven around town in white vans and dropped off in mailrooms? Well, this was leading it to be leaked all over town. So the joke was that you could read what was in the National Intelligence Daily first in the Washington Post, and then you would get it on your desktop. So the new job was to solve that problem, to make the National Intelligence Daily secure. And I looked at that. That's not my strength. That kind of detailed work is not my strength. But in that long list of responsibilities for that job was explore digital technologies to see if we can improve the delivery of our analysis. And I was like, that's it. That's my opportunity. Again, I didn't know at the time that what I was doing was I was finding a way to align my idea with what the status quo already cared about. I was trying to find that little area of overlap between moving forward in the digital age, what I cared about, and what the CIA cared about, security of its information. So essentially, I applied for the job and I got it. And the lesson, I only recognize this lesson now, is that I was approaching it through an adjacency. When you have a new idea for your organization, particularly if it's antithetical to how the organization normally functions, right? If it's heretical, it's very useful to use as a wedge, as a leverage point, that area where your idea and the status quo overlaps. And that's exactly what happened. By approaching it through an adjacency, I was able to really begin to advance the CIA's exploration of digital technologies. So you notice I've been talking a lot about myself, the brilliance and all of this. And that's an accurate characterization of what I was like during that period. I mean, I had nailed it. I understood the change. And that's what change agents obviously are in organizations. Those people that somehow they get a sense of what's really going to happen before other people do. And then they have to try to convince everybody else, right? But for me, it was all about me. So I know this lesson only in hindsight. That the most important step, the first step for a change agent is to gain allies, to make their idea somebody else's idea, to make your idea community property. And in fact, I argue that at the beginning of a change effort, and this is often a trap, it's an Admiral Akbar moment, that you get obsessed with the purity of your idea. But sometimes, often I would say, the number of supporters you gain is more important than preserving the purity of your ideas. And I'll even say a little bit more about that. But it's not just gaining allies, it's keeping them, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the old silent movies, the Keystone Cops, the police van turns the corner, the cops fall out the back. Well, that's a metaphor for what happens when you advance your ideas more quickly or more radically than your followers want it, and you'll lose them. So it's not enough to gain allies, it's to keep allies and to get those allies to do effective things for you in advancing your idea. So, I'm not a good bureaucrat. I never was. Not really good with details. I remember once someone gave me feedback, Carmen, you need to control your body language because when you're in a meeting and you think it's bullshit, it's like all over your face. So, not my strength. And as we were advancing our ideas of, becoming digital and online, and, there were lots of mistakes that we were making. And because I was an idea person, and I wasn't really doing a good job of gaining and keeping allies, I wasn't reaching out to the right people. So along the way, you know how Microsoft Word or any other Word program, you keep the revision history, right? You saw all the changes. So a typical process in CIA would be to write a super squirrel document, and then you go, well, we can't share this bit, so let's take it out. And then we realized, or I only realized after the fact, that a clever person could still find their way to that information. And so I had a huge problem. Now, there was a woman at CIA, Hope, and Hope knew everything there was to know about Microsoft Word, document control, revision history. But I had never gone to Hope. I'd never really included her in my discussions, but I had to now. And when I approach Hope, she goes, she's so ready to help. She's actually been waiting to be asked. And she not only fixed this problem, but anticipated lots of other problems that we were going to have. So another lesson I have to survive as a change agent is befriend exactly those people that you don't think are going to be helpful to you. Those what I like to call bureaucratic black belts. The people that know all the bureaucratic stuff that goes on in an organization, that know all the kind of implicit, sort of hidden cultural rules. You know, take one out to lunch. Ask them, you know, when you've seen a successful change effort in this organization, what have they done right? And what have the ones who have failed done wrong? And you will learn a lot if you can find a way to befriend the bureaucratic black belt. And another suggestion I would have is if you're in an organization for a long time, you might actually take a job for a year and a half that makes you smart about bureaucracy. You know, it's a ninja move, and not everyone's going to want to do it. But understanding how bureaucracy works is going to make you a much more effective change agent. So some other suggestions I have. Know when to quit, or at least to step back. Remember how I told you people have described me as cynical and negative? Well, I don't think I'm a cynical and negative person. When people are describing you in ways that you don't recognize, that's a sure sign. It's like danger, Will Robinson. I don't know if that travels very well, but there you have it. Ideally, you will know when to quit and step back before that happens. So to do that, you have to have, again, another reason why gaining supporters is really important to you. You have to have friends, people that talk to you, that will give you honest feedback. And I will also say that, you know, for me, this was just a very difficult and unhealthy period of my life. I drank too much. I lost lots of friendships about it. It was extremely hard. And you have to, as a change agent, you know, you have to minimize that other stress that's going on in your life. Like if you're having a divorce, or you need to move to a new place, or you're having financial problems, I don't suggest that you also tackle on making heretical change in your organization. That's not a very good idea. Know when to quit. Always speak your truth. You know, even though you quit actively promoting your concept, you can still talk about the things that you think are important to other people. And I had an experience after I retired from CIA. I was invited back into the building to meet with a group of rebels at work. That's what we called ourselves. And, you know, we had a nice session. And afterwards, this young man comes up to me, Tom, and he says, "Carmen, I bet you don't remember me." I remembered him a little bit. And he says, because I eventually became a senior leader at CIA, he goes, "You were talking when you were still at the agency about how there was not enough creativity in how we performed as analysts. And when you said that, I really agreed with you. And so I went and explored where I could get a degree in creativity. And he found a master's in creativity program at the University of Buffalo, and he got the agency to pay for his degree, and now he was the teacher of creativity and analysis at CIA. And I get goose pimples now when I think about it. I was blown away by that. So my lesson is, speak your truth, because if what you say is real, is valuable, there's a good chance someone else will hear it. And develop your emotional intelligence. So, you know, remember how I told you that my dad was an alcoholic and we had all these fights? Well, a few years ago, I was interviewed for this show, Entrepreneurs Everywhere, by hosted by Steve Blank. And I think Steve Blank is a known figure in the lean, agile community. Anyway, so he's done hundreds of these interviews, brings them in, talks about your entrepreneurial experience. And so he asked me, what was your childhood like? And I go, he goes, well, is it like a great childhood? And I go, not really. My parents fought a lot. My father had a drinking problem. He goes, aha. And I go, aha. And he says, I ask every entrepreneur I interview this question. And 80% of them, the overwhelming majority, tell me something like what you told me, that they had a chaotic childhood and that it was very difficult for them. And my theory is, his theory, is that when you have that experience growing up, it's a sink or swim experience. And if you survive it, it really develops your spider senses. It really develops your emotional intelligence. That was, quite a thing he said to me. And I'm not suggesting that any of you go and make sure your children have chaotic childhoods. But what it does suggest is that difficult experiences can be important growth experiences. And that also tells us that, emotional intelligence appears to be an important success factor for change agents. Let me, go back. Let me just say a few more important survival skills for change agents. When you're advancing your idea, tell stories and appeal to emotions. And that's what I've been doing the last 25 minutes. I know it's sometimes hard to do because it seems a little corny. For me, it seems a little corny to do what I've just done. But the research shows that those emotional appeals really resonate and make a difference in winning people over. Don't forget that organizations value smoothness. What I mean by that is that organizations are formed to preserve an idea and advance it at scale. They think they've got a winning formula. And so what they want is that executed as often as possible and as smoothly as possible. And when you're suggesting an idea for change, that's not smooth, that's crunchy. And the fact that organizations value smoothness, even if your idea is not particularly heretical, the fact that you're advocating crunchiness is. So you just need to think about that and remember, how do I advance my idea in as sort of smooth a way as possible? So a lot of change agents want to really rock the boat, but maybe a better approach is to try to keep the boat as steady as possible. Some conflict is good and productive. It is better, I believe, to have someone oppose your ideas directly in a meeting than to have them say nothing and go away and then be passive aggressive, which is like organizations are breeding grounds for passive aggressive behavior. And oftentimes, you present your ideas in a meeting and someone will actually say, well, I don't know how that's going to work in the summer when we're short-staffed. And your initial reaction might be to say, oh, that's not going to be a problem. Don't say that. That person cares enough about the organization to say that to you. So say instead, I think you're right. I think it could be a problem when we're short-staffed. Do you have an idea of how we could ameliorate that? And if that person bites, if they give you a suggestion, you're on the road of transforming a potential opponent into a neutral person or maybe even a supporter. So some conflict is good and productive. It's something you can take advantage of. Spend more energy on practicalities. I'm totally guilty of this. You spend so much time on your vision, or the other side of that, you spend so much time admiring the problem that people, they agree with the vision and they agree you have a problem, but they want to know, how do you get there? A, B, C, Z. How are we going to do it, right? How are we going to do it in a way that isn't too crunchy? So spend more time on practicalities, and that's where the bureaucratic black belts can help you. Remember, when you're a change agent, the status quo owns the measuring stick, right? The status quo in software development oftentimes wants you to pave the cow path, the way things have been done, and they're going to measure your new ideas against using the old ruler. So you need to be aware of that. You need to have that conversation with them. You go, yes, I accept these metrics, but as our idea matures, we're going to have new outputs, new outcomes, and we're going to need different metrics. And finally, avoid the Athena complex. Who knows the birth origin of Athena? The goddess of wisdom. No? She jumps out of the head of Zeus, fully formed, her armor and everything. And that's what a temptation for change agents is to think they know it all. Fully formed. So the idea is pure. The best way to make someone support your idea is when they feel a little bit of their idea is part of your idea. So in some ways, and I'm not suggesting that you fake it, but having a certain amount of imperfection and incompleteness to your idea is tactically a good thing because people can support and you can incorporate their ideas into your ideas. So this is actually the slide you can take a picture of. So, because it's really the only reason why it's in here. It's the summary slide, and it's got all the points in here. I want to say a few more things about if you're a leader. If you're a leader of a team, what can you do to make it easier for the change agents, right? So, a lot of people talk about what is innovation. And in the talk previously, I talked about sometimes innovation is as simple as the combination of two previously uncombined ideas, where you get a kind of a new synthesis that's useful. But another really simple definition that I like of innovation is that innovation is the opposite of policy. I love the simplicity of that because policy is the current orthodoxy articulated, right? And if you have a different idea, it can be as simple, it doesn't have to be like heretical as, well, why don't we change the policy in this way? And that's actually a language that bureaucracies understand better, right? Okay, a policy, we're going to have a new policy. We're going to rewrite the policy. Okay, that doesn't sound too horrible. Now, I used this slide in my last talk, but for those of you who were not there, one of the things that managers do when they think that they're encouraging people to offer up their different ideas or their new ideas, but actually they're using language that doesn't work. So for those of you who were not in my previous talk, do you have any thoughts about what's wrong with these phrases, which are commonly used by managers? Like, I have an open door policy. Very common for managers to say that. I'm sure there's different idioms or phrases in whatever languages are your languages. But anyone have any thoughts on these? Why do I think that we can do better than these phrases as a leader? Okay, I'll give you one. I'm sure you've heard, don't bring me a problem unless you have a solution, right? Who's heard that phrase? Yes. Now, you have the skills to identify the problem, but you're also expected to have the skills to identify the solution. Those could be two completely different set of skills. You're a NASA engineer or astronomer, and you see the asteroid that's about to hit the planet. You don't have a solution for it, so you don't mention it. It's just stupid, right? So let me suggest other approaches. Instead of saying any comments or questions, if you're a manager and you really want someone to suggest a different idea, you can pose a more inviting question. You can say, what did I get wrong? Or how would you do it differently? Or what did I miss? And this doesn't just apply to managers. This applies to colleagues as well. Don't bring me problems without solutions. We can work together on the solutions. I like to say, okay, when you say I have an open door policy, what are you telling the employee? Oh, leave me alone. Good. Right? So you're actually emphasizing the fact that you have a door. Right? And the other thing you're saying is if you have an idea, you got to come into my space to talk about it. My domain, my seat of power. Right? It's much more effective, and I know managing by walking around is rather trite, but it's much more effective when the leader comes to the other members of the team on a regular basis and say, hey, is there something I can do this week to make your job easier? You know, or what do you need fixed right now that I don't know about yet? Much more effective questions you can use. That's complicated, let's take it offline. You hear that a lot in a meeting when you just don't want to disrupt the agenda. That's complicated, let's take it offline. But when you say that, even if you're sincere, what everybody else is hearing is, oh, she doesn't want to hear about it. So what you need to do is write that in there, say, that's complicated, let's take it offline, get out your calendar, can you meet at 4 o'clock today? That way you're signaling, yeah, okay, that's a genuine idea, we don't have enough time to consider it correctly. And then my bugaboo about this is, let's reach consensus. When you say that you have a consensus decision-making style, you're raising the bar really high for the person who has an objection. Oh, you know, if I have a new idea, it's going to have to be a matter of life or death before I dare break up the consensus. What I like to say is consensus is not a decision-making style. Consensus is a way to avoid decisions, right? So what you need to have consensus on is how you resolve differences among your team. What's that process? But the actual decision you make has to allow for different points of view. So that's my talk. What did I get wrong? I think I actually have 2 minutes. Any questions? Well, again, what did I get? We fall into that. Any questions, comments, but what would you add, or anyone has an experience, or? Yes?
Did you manage to make any difference at the CIO?
I did. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Intellipedia. So in the mid-2000s, we brought in the Wikimedia software, and it was not my idea. So the biggest difference I made was saying yes to someone else's idea. And these young men came to me, Sean and Don, that's their real names, and they said, Carmen, we can bring in the Wikimedia software, we can create a classified Wikipedia, they called it Intellipedia, we can collaborate, and I mean, it was so countercultural. And all the lessons that I had learned in all my failures, I used them to coach them to be more successful. And at one point, brings up a good point, when you're a manager, they came to me and they said after 6 months, Carmen, not enough people are using Intellipedia, you have to mandate it, because I was like the leader of the analytic directorate. And you have to mandate it. And what did I say? No. I said, oh, as soon as I mandate it, that's the kiss of death. It's either going to grow organically or it's not. But what I will do is the Wikimedia software, I still think it's bad, was clumsy to use, and so there had to be a training class, always a bad thing when you're trying to do change. But I made it a point of appearing at every training class and being there for an hour or two to just show that support. And this leads to something I didn't mention, but when you're a leader and you want to make a difference, a change in your organization, your calendar reflects your priorities. And the status quo loves to control the calendar. You get into a leadership position, you find that you've inherited the schedule of meetings, and they're all part of the status quo priority system. And if you're a real change agent, you've got to buck that, and you've got to make time for what are your priorities. What else? Oh, yeah. Well, arguably I failed because I flamed out and I lost all my friendships. So even though I heard the advice, I knew it was important at the time, I wasn't able to execute it. I'm trying to think if I ever, once it's a lot more comfortable doing this when you're in a position of authority. Let me tell you, it feels much better. But even then, people look at you a little funny, right? And because you're not behaving like a normal leader. I'll tell you what happened when I flamed out, and I couldn't get a job, ended up doing a stupid job. I developed a whole new set of friendships. So I acquired a whole different set of perspectives on my ideas, and that actually helped me be more effective. So I think when you become a change agent and you're stuck with all the people, you're like in an echo chamber where everyone is saying the same thing. I think finding on purpose a way to broaden the scope of people that you deal with, I think is a way of becoming more comfortable. Anything else? Yes. Yeah, I don't know why it was important. I think that's a really interesting question. So why did I care so much? I don't know why I cared a lot. And I think a lot of people that are change agents, there's something going on with their personality where I've always been like unconventional. Like I'm a kind of a contrarian. Like if something's really, really popular, I don't like it. And in fact, there are some things that I liked before anybody else liked. And then when everybody else starts liking it, I stop doing it. It's really bad, So I don't know why that is. What is that personality of? But it's a trait that helped me when I was an analyst, right? I'm always kind of looking. When something new happens, I'm not judgmental about it. It just happens to be something new. And I think a lot of people, when they encounter something new, immediately try to judge it. And I kind of have a delayed bristle on the new. I just, it is what it is. Talking too much about me. All right, well, thank you very much. Oh, I forgot. The art is not, The art is by my friend John Conroy. It's not by me. I really wanted a different look on slides because I hate PowerPoint. There you go.